Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Performance Cafe. And we've got an extra special guest again today with us by names of Yendor Felgate. I'm so excited to be talking performance today because, of course, it very closely relates to what we do in strengths. So, what's the deal with strengths and performance?
Thanks for that. So from our perspective, it really makes sense to work with somebody's potential. And that's really a great way of thinking about talents and strengths, isn't it? If you have great potential in a particular area and you develop that potential, you're going to be world-class or get exponential performance. The easiest way to think about this is, say, using a sporting analogy. So if you take somebody like, Messi, for example, or Ronaldo, they very early on were identified as having great football potential. That was their talent. They've now, over 10,000 hours, have developed that into a strength. And so you can see that they're at the top of their class when it comes to football.
So, what does that mean for us in business? Does that mean that we continually develop employees, and if we just develop them enough, that we'll be fine?
No, it's based on the idea that we all have a unique set of talents that we can bring to the workplace. And really, it's about business investing in the uniqueness of people's talents and developing those to get exponential performance. And of course, it requires great intentionality because we're all unique and we have a unique series and combinations of talents. And so that intervention needs to be specific to us rather than send everybody on an EQ course or everybody doing an MBA. Whilst both of those have value, we're not suggesting one size fits all when it comes to individual performance and being the best version of you.
Wonderful. So we're saying we're going to match training to people's potential. But then I suppose that discussion has a third element. If there's potential, there is skill, then there's also the job profile. Because if I've got a bunch of people, mustn't they just follow the job profile?
Yeah, absolutely. And so here's what a lot of people get quite confused about. So we will all achieve or be able to achieve the same outcome. So what your KPIs or KPAs on a job description would say, you have to do 1, 2, and 3. But how you do that, your approach and how you show up to do that is singular and uniquely attached to who you are. And so you can achieve the same outcome, but you'll achieve it in a very different way. And so another sport analogy is quite useful. You have Roger Federer and you have Rafa Nadal. Both are world-class tennis players, but their approach and the way they play the game is uniquely attached to them. So you can achieve the same outcome and the same level of success as somebody else, but you won't do it in their way. And that's why a lot of the self-help motivation books may not be helpful for us. They say, 10 steps to greatness by copying Richard Branson, usually in the entrepreneur space, or Elon Musk, but we're not them. We've got to find our own path and journey, but can we achieve an Elon Musk outcome if we develop our potential? Perhaps.
Wonderful. So are we actually then looking at a workforce as a source of potential instead of something I have to drive to perform?
100%. So I think the strength-based approach turns a lot of HR practice on its head. HR practice is based on the assumption that we can't trust our people, so we have to manage and control them. And so a lot of HR policy is that. And secondly, we say, well, we're not getting enough performance from them, so there must be something wrong with them. And so we do a gap analysis and we do a skills plan and we fill the gap, and then we wonder why at best we get a slight uptick. Whereas a strength-based approach goes, we all have potential and talent. Let's identify that. Let's work with that. And funny, your contribution will skyrocket. So we think that that's a better approach around motivation and engagement than to drive performance on fixing or minding the gap that we see on the UK railways.
Okay, so are you saying that we must stop focusing on weaknesses per se?
No, again, that's a bit of a misnomer. You know, people go all or nothing. So weaknesses is obviously a problem if it's a skill weakness. In other words, if you're an airline pilot and you don't know how to fly an aircraft, there's a bit of a challenge. Yeah, you know, that's not a strength-based question. That's fly the airplane question, and so we can't circumvent that. So that could be good. The other way of thinking about it is, whilst you are strong at some things and not great at others in a strength point of view, sometimes a strength could be a hindrance or an obstacle to you. In other words, it stops you from progressing. That could be another way of thinking about weakness. Now, does that mean that I have to go onto a strength course that teaches me something that I'm not good at? No. It's about thinking about what I'm good at, but using it intentionally in the right context at the right volume level. In other words, not to overuse, not to underuse, but to get that balance right. That's where the power and edge lies.
So that sounds like Goldilocks. It must be just right.
Yeah, and you know, it's a lifelong journey of being who you are, isn't it? I mean, you start and you continue, and you can do that intentionally and self-aware, or you can muddle through and see what happens, which most of us tend to do.
So tell us a bit about strengths, leadership, and performance. Where do you stand on that?
Well, I think that if you think about leadership, the role of a leader is really to enable other people. And so strengths, I think, is very connected in the leadership space around concepts like servant leadership and situational leadership. Servant leadership in the way that leadership is not about you and your ego. It's about what others need from you for them to be successful. That's a strength-based question. The second one is about situational awareness, and you know, there is no manual, I think, in the leadership world, even though we've written about it for 2,000 years, about the fact that yeah is a step-by-step guide to all leadership hassles. It's about playing what you see in front of you. It's about recognizing the uniqueness of the people that are going to help you with that situation, and it's about responding appropriately. One size does not fit all for leaders. And I think that if you get those two things right, enablement of others and using your strengths to help others in the situation that you're facing, you're going to get a performance uplift and an engagement uplift that is far superior than trying to manage, control, or determine how things should happen, especially during the time of virtual teams and the impact of working from home and what we've seen in the pandemic. In the pandemic, it's been dramatic. The clients that we work with, those that took in a coaching approach or a needs-based approach, have been far more successful in holding teams accountable, holding people, engaging people, and really being empathetic around the transition and the impact of the pandemic. Those that have been very technical have tended to either overmanage or undermanage, and they have missed that opportunity to connect with their teams.
So I hear you talking about strengths as an engagement tool. And I often like to say that if you were a bad manager at the office, you'll be a bad manager remotely.
Well, I think you'll be a worse manager remotely, actually. Yeah, that's right.
How much, and I don't know if it even is a possibility, but how much of strengths leads to trust?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. So trust really is about, I think, consistency, about relationship, about intimacy, and about integrity over your ego. So the higher your ego, the less trust you're going to have. The lower your ego, and the more consistency, relationship, integrity, and intimacy, the greater trust. And how do I build that intimacy and that relationship with others? It's about understanding what their strength needs are and enabling them to be the best versions of themselves. It's what a coach does, isn't it? It's a workplace coaching approach to leadership. And that's where I think trust comes in, because strength is a positive way to give that feedback and meet those needs that builds people rather than trying to catch them out type of leadership, which you often get with managers who complain that I don't know what my person's doing, so ergo I must put a keystroke logging software onto the person's laptop because clearly when their fingers on the spacebar, they are productive. Really? I mean, that's
Yes.
ridiculous.
Yeah, I hear you. I hear you. Okay, so then we can help people be better managers. What I really would like to also understand, and this is one that I think might lend towards my history in corporate and sort of like maybe some of the more negative learnings from there. But
Sure.
how do you use this? Because one of the challenges is I cannot treat someone who's been in the company for 4 years the same way as I treat someone who just entered. Yet I want to give them that same feel that they belong and that they are trusted. But at the same time, they are new. They do need a bit more. Where do we find the balance according to you?
Well, you're going to respond to what they need from you. So that's the first departure point. So whether they're there for 4 years or 1 year, obviously somebody who is in the onboarding and quite new phase will need more from you as a leader than perhaps somebody who's much more mature, been there 4 years, knows the ropes and so on. But both need a strength-based leadership approach to keep them engaged, continuously engaged, and performing. Because it's not a one-day wonder. And just because you've been there for 4 years doesn't mean that you don't want that recognition or don't have career aspirations or don't want to develop further. None of us are perfect in that sense. So it's okay to modify and customize your approach to each individual, because why? They're unique and they have unique requirements. And so again, this one-size-fits-all strategy I don't think works.
Wonderful. So what we're saying is, because we're managing individuals as individuals and not a bunch of, I don't want to say drones, but like pawns that all look, feel the same, that we will then situationally manage per person. Will we not land up in a situation where someone goes, but why does this person get more attention than I do? Why does this person get...
Yeah, and quite conceivably, but the answer to that will be quite clear, which is the reason why this person gets this amount of time is because they need that amount of time. Do you need that amount of time? Well, if you do, I'm happy to provide that.
I like that. I like that, because I think that is one of the problems when you're managing a really large team. And from your background, obviously, you can tell me. But I think as a manager, and I've been in situations where managers have had up to 30, 40 employees reporting to them. It's kind of like I don't have time to individualize my approach to each and every single person. So I do like the idea that individualization doesn't mean giving everyone exactly the same amount of everything.
Yeah, but here's another problem that we face is that in South Africa, and particularly, managers are span breakers. They're not managers. So what is the role of a manager? A manager should be spending 80% or more time on the people in their team. Otherwise, they have no job. Managers are not super technical specialists and be promoted there just so that they can do technical work, but just at a higher level. That's not what a manager does. If that's what the manager does, you don't need a manager, right? So take them out of the system and pay them differently and do whatever you need to do. So there's a big misconception about what managers actually do. They do their technical work and then whip their subordinates. No, I mean, that can't be right. So if you spend 80% of your time on people, then the equation becomes a lot easier to deal with, right? But HR systems and organizations in South Africa particularly aren't set up that way. And then secondly, we don't train our managers properly. Now, people will set me on fire because they'll say, listen, we spend millions of rands on leadership and management development, and everybody has an MBA and so on. And I say, yeah, that's all important stuff. But can a manager do the very human job of connecting with the people in their team? Yes or no? And usually the answer to that is no, because they don't know how to, right? And that's a strength-based question, we think. Now, it's not me just inventing this. Gallup did over 1 million management interviews. 1 million people were interviewed for their book, It's the Manager. And what came up over and over again is management work is not set up for success. We as managers often do not take our team seriously. We either think that they are brilliant or they're useless and nothing much in between. And we do not know how to develop them, other than sending them to HR for disciplinary hearings when things go wrong, or to training to send them on courses that they're never going to use or be effective. So I always use this example in my corporate career, because I'm not often, sometimes not, well, there are times I've been accused of not being too nice. I've been sent on EQ training courses, but yet my empathy is number 34. That's a bit of a waste of time. What I have learned over time with my coach, though, which was much more valuable, is whilst my empathy is number 34, it doesn't mean I don't care. It just means I have to use my other strengths to achieve a caring outcome. And that's where I use my learner. And, once that light bulb went on, man, people now go, yes, that Yendor guy, oh, what fantastic EQ. And I'm going, not because I went on an EQ training course, it's because, I connected with it, what I'm good at in other areas, and I intentionally use it to achieve an outcome where I don't have great strength dominance. And that's a success story. And I think a lot of times when we work and coach executives, those are light bulb aha moments, because they've always been saying, oh, you're a walkover, or you're not nice enough. And then, of course, you get people that go, well, strength, empathy is my number one strength, and everybody thinks I'm a wuss. None of that's true.
And I suppose there's an element of that that comes up with all assessments, is that one has to, you can't just do your strengths assessment and get a debrief from a coach and be sort of like released into the world, because we get hooked on a word. I know for you it's, I know you mentioned empathy now, but I know the other word in strengths coaching that really can wind us up is strategic, because when someone is at managerial level, they measure and they're like an executive, and their strategic is at number 34, and they go, I'm in the wrong place, because we take things at face value. How important and what kind of stuff do we do in coaching to help people with that?
Yeah, it's a great question. Look, obviously doing your assessment and having a debrief is a great starting point. But if you can imagine that if you're 40 years old, it's taken you 40 years to get where you are, right? You can't expect, self-awareness and this conversion on the road to Damascus to happen overnight on this journey of self-exploration. So some of the good Gallup coaches will say to you, I spend an entire year just on understanding one of my strengths, and your dominance is about 10. So that's 10 years of development work just to get you up to speed with your top 10, let alone anything else. So that should give you a sense of a little bit about what's involved in often what they call mindfulness or self-awareness. I mean, we could spend hours on blind spots and impact on others, and how you perceive yourself and how others perceive you are two totally different things. And usually as an executive, you have this rubric, I am the best commercial leader in the world and everybody loves me. And usually the reality is probably not as optimistic as that, right? So the coaching process really is helping you to do three things. And this is what I love about Gallup. Name, in other words, identify your talents, know what they are. Otherwise, man, you're really developing in the dark, aren't you? It's a bit like going blindfolded into a minefield. You may get lucky or unlucky, depending. The second one is claiming, is understanding how your strengths show up in your world as per you. That unique view of, if you are strategic, what that means. And then the third one is to aim it. In other words, to intentionally use your strengths in context. In other words, show up in the right combination for what you're trying to achieve. Otherwise, what happens is that everything, every nail looks like it needs a hammer, or everything that needs that, when you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right? And that's not what we're saying at all. There are times you need to use a hammer, and other times you just don't. And that intentionality is where the maturity and sophistication comes in. And that's what a coach is there to do, is help you name, claim, and aim. It's when you aim, the intentionality is where the power and edge comes from strengths, I think, and where amazing stuff happens. And that's the role of a coach over several sessions to help you to work through that. And remember, we're not one strength at a time. We're messy, complicated combinations of strengths at the same time. And then, as you know, we've talked about this before, what about your values and your skills and all that good stuff? A coach really is a sounding board, adds perspective, sometimes gives you a bit of a shove out the door when you need to, but essentially helps you to build, name, claim, and aim.